So we really are in a crucial turning point for everyone in the world, but particularly for men, because men carry the energy needed to recreate the structures that we need in our world.
It was Kate Spreckley speaking about the pathway to the conscious man. Kate is a soul, transformational, and executive coach. She's a speaker and a facilitator. She's the founder to Spirit Pathways and an author to Awakening the Heart and Pathways to Mastery. Kate really brings a real personal story to this podcast around the loss of her brother to suicide within the last few months, and what she has learned and the passion that has grown inside of her to be able to support men to open up, to heal, to look inside, and to be able to transform into men that can lead this world into a different way of showing up, a more inclusive world, a more compassionate world. I hope you enjoy this podcast. Welcome to Fierce Compassion, presented by yours truly, Brett William Simpson. I believe that in order to create an inclusive and functional society, we must foster greater self-care and compassion in order to apply these same values to others and heal the divisiveness and suffering in the world today. This podcast is dedicated to exploring emotional intelligence, understanding resilience, and celebrating those with the courage to be vulnerably human. It is intended to be uplifting, thought-provoking, and heartwarming. And with luck, encourage your humanity and inner weirdo some more space to breathe. Thank you for listening, and I wish you enough challenge to shake you and enough care that you might foster greater emotional resilience in such uncertain times. Be kind to your fine self.
COVID has revealed something in our societies that is toxic, poisonous, whatever negative, whatever adjective you want to add to that. But at the same time, I want to point out that I don't just think that it's men. I think that there's a toxic element that is running through our cultures and through our society that is the shadow part of masculinity. And if we look at men and women, we each carry a masculine aspect and a feminine aspect. It's not just about, you're a man and I'm a woman, so therefore I'm feminine and you're masculine. We carry those energies, both of those energies within us. And so there's a toxic masculinity that runs through women as well, and has been something that I think is often ignored or suppressed or not looked at, because we've been in a time, certainly in the last 100 years, or if not longer, where women have been, there's been this focus on women taking back their power, on having a say, on getting the vote, on rising out of the subjugation that has happened over the last few thousand years. And I think we must be careful about how we speak about the toxic masculinity. I think we must recognize that toxic masculinity exists both in the male and the female. And it is something that we need to start addressing, because as the world crumbles and chaos erupts and seems to reign at these times, we need to look at the masculine within all of us, which is the part of us that will rebuild the world, that will bring new structures in, that will enable us to take the vision that we have about the world that we want to live in and actually manifest it, because that is the force. I mean, one of the things that I read this week that really beautifully explained the feminine and masculine energy. It says that the feminine energy is often associated with the soft, receptive, intuitive, feeling, healing, vulnerability, openness, and relaxation. The masculine energy is found in the exterior, while the feminine energy is found in the interior. The masculine thinks while the feminine feels. The masculine manifests and performs while the feminine senses and discovers. Thoughts dominate the masculine, while the feminine is more in the heart. The masculine shows anger, while the feminine shows vulnerability. And I really thought that was quite a beautiful, concise way of simplifying what those two energies are that exist within both of us. And if we look at how the manifestation of our world in the last few thousand years has been about greed, power, and power in a negative sense, control. Those are just three of the things that I can think of, and those are the masculine within all of us has manifested that. And what we're looking at now is like, how do we bring the balance back? How do we bring the balance back between the masculine and feminine energies within ourselves, and how do we bring that balance back within the masculine and feminine in the world? And it starts with what you and I are doing now, is having this conversation. You're a man, I'm a woman, we both have these energies flowing within us, but yet we are having this conversation around something that is essential in the healing that needs to happen in humanity. And those things that you spoke about, Black Lives Matter, the violence against women and children, all of that, yes, a lot of that stuff, racism, it stems out of the masculine energy, and how that is directed is not necessarily just through men, it is also directed through women. Women mother sons.
Mm.
Women have a huge part to play in how men are in the world.
Mm.
And how they have been in the world. It's big, and it's not just about the father's influence in the masculine; it's the mother's influence in the masculine. If we look at the development of the child, the first 7 years of a child's life, the mother has the greatest impact, not the father. Yes, sometimes the mother's not around, so then the father has that impact, but it's a feminine energy that is being developed in the child. It's not a masculine energy. That masculine energy only starts being activated at 14. So for the first 14 years of a child's life, the feminine is the part of us that is being developed, that is growing, that is expanding. And then we, in the next cycle, 14 to 21, or 21 to 28, it's the masculine force of manifesting our lives, manifesting where we stand in the world, manifesting our individuality. And if we haven't been given the opportunity or the right care and nurturing in those first 14 years, you're going to end up with a problem. And that problem manifests in how our current society expects both men and women to be. And that has to change.
Yeah, and it's a tricky part because, I'm a white male, and at the moment it does feel like, well, it's not challenging to be a white male. You can go in any part of history, and you're pretty much safe, and you're pretty much the dominant species of Homo sapiens. But at the moment, with everything with such tension, I've been through a bit of a journey that started with Mankind Project, which is an amazing program that essentially kind of helped me kind of look at masculinity in a different way. But with everything coming up and the accountability of what we as men, or that masculine energy you speak of that exists in both men and women, but typically this happens with men. Our role models have been people who have dominated other people. They are people who, the history is written by the people who conquer. It's not by the people who were conquered. So for us, and I can imagine for this young generation coming up, who do they look at? Like, my thing is, like, I have done a lot of work around being a conscious man and showing up as a conscious man. But I suppose my question to you, Kate, is like, how do I change myself to be a healthy version of the masculine? Because what I'm also wary of is that toxic masculinity is a phrase now, and it's weaponized. I feel that there's a huge amount of judgment that sits within it. And what happens with the toxic, absolutely, yeah, fantastic. But masculinity is also now seen as this negative thing. So how do I reinvent myself as a man to be able to be the best example that I can be, so that youngsters coming up behind us can then look and go, oh, well, that's refreshing, or that's respectful leader. I mean, have you got any? I'd love to hear your thoughts around that.
Well, I think Brett, that the first thing that we've got to do, and I think this is across the board, men and women, is that we actually need to look at our wounds. We need to look at our damage. We need to look at what has formed us. You know, who have we become today, and why have we become the person that we are today? What happened in our life to create this toxic masculinity? Because yes, there's almost become like an archetypal energy that exists, and as a man grows and as he becomes a man in the world, you're right. You kind of look at these successful people and you see what they have and what they've achieved
Mm.
on a materialistic standpoint, but we don't look at what they've done to get there. Yes, some of them we can look at and say, well, they went on a journey and they discovered themselves and they discovered their purpose and they discovered their passion, and they worked hard and they achieved what they achieved through that hard work. But there are a lot of people, really successful people in the world, that have left behind complete and utter destruction.
Mm.
They've destroyed people, they've destroyed relationships, they've destroyed their families, all in the name of achieving wealth, status, or power.
Mm.
And we've got to look at what is the energy, the archetypal energy that men are working with right now, and how do we change that? And that's about looking at yourself. Who am I as a man? What are the values and the principles that drive me to do what it is that I'm doing? We often don't look at that. We don't. Why? When do we sit and actually, or when are we given the opportunity to sit and say, what drives me? What is driving me to achieve? What is my sole purpose and what I am here to do on this planet? Or is it because I've seen that that's something that I want to be, or something that I want to achieve, and I'm going to go for it no matter what? We've grown up in a world that expects us to have goals and something that we are working towards, but we're not really taught to look at why. Why do I want that, to achieve that goal? Why do I want that thing? Why do I want that kind of lifestyle? Because I've met so many successful people and so many successful businessmen who have dedicated their lives to achieving success, but that is all they have. They don't have a good relationship with their children. They don't have a good relationship with their partners. A lot of them feel incredibly lonely. They can't trust anyone. They feel suspicious around anyone who wants to be in their world or in their lives. And that is an incredibly challenging place to be, because you will get to some point in your life where you go, what is the point? Why did I do this? I've got everything, but yet I'm not happy. I don't feel fulfilled. I don't have any joy, and I don't have the things that actually truly matter in my life. And I'm not saying that having money and having wealth is wrong.
Yeah.
I just think it has to be balanced with the right motivations, and an understanding of what it is that is driving us. Because a lot of people, a lot of men particularly, have come from incredibly difficult and toxic and dysfunctional family situations. And they think that if they just make it, if they just achieve the wealth, if they just achieve the success, they're not going to feel the pain that they have carried their entire lives. And then they get to a point and they're like, well, the pain still is there. And that's when we have to look back and say, okay, well, what is this pain that I'm carrying? And maybe I can speak about my own personal experience that I've had in the last couple of months.
Please.
With with my brother, and I've got two brothers, The youngest one was 7 years younger than me, and he recently committed suicide. And there's a lot of things that led up to that outcome. And looking, I mean, we had the discussion around doing something around conscious masculinity a couple of weeks before he actually died. And that impulse in me has just grown stronger and stronger since his death. And I've really had to unpack for myself so that I can understand what caused his death. He may have committed suicide, but there was something that drove him to that. And if I just use his life as an example, he had an incredibly difficult life from day one. He was born at 28 weeks, which is incredibly premature. He wasn't expected to live. He would have been 42 at the end of last year. So medicine 42 years ago didn't really know how to cater for that kind of newborn. But despite everything, he survived. But he spent the first 3 months of his life, or just about 3 months of his life, in hospital, away from the nurturing care that a baby needs. On top of that, he was born into a family that was incredibly toxic, and born to a mother who was incredibly narcissistic and abusive. And so she had to hold back on her impulse to be abusive with him, because he was so tiny and he needed a lot more care than a normal newborn would need. But he grew up in he was born into that environment. And then for the first 8 years of his life, lived in chronic pain because he had a defect in his kidney that wasn't picked up for 8 years. And it was, my mother just said it was psychosomatic, but I mean, the poor kid would wake up in the middle of the night screaming. And eventually, after 8 years, I can't remember how it unfolded, but eventually he was taken to the doctor. The doctor did a urine test, and his urine was red, and said to him, "How long has your urine been this color?" And he said, "Always." So this boy had been, in incredible pain, was immediately rushed into surgery. They operated, they removed the vein that was growing through his kidney, and unfortunately the kidney never worked again. And he went through all of that, and then a year after that he was sexually abused by a priest. And that went on for a couple of months, until eventually my parents discovered what was going on. And thankfully my father went to the trouble of reporting it to the police, had the man arrested, made sure that he went to jail. So that all of that was done. But growing up in the 80s, psychology and all of that, you didn't go for therapy because then there was something seriously wrong with you.
Yeah.
So there was none of that. I mean, he had a couple of therapy sessions to prepare the court case, because the child psychologist needed to give the court information. But beyond that, it was never discussed again. And 4 years ago, he ended up having a complete breakdown, because he suddenly, which is something I'd been saying to him for probably 20 years, but he hadn't been listening, is that, our family's really messed up, and our mother is a narcissist, and I seem to have been shouting into the wind and being the only person that could see it. But 4 years ago he finally saw it, and as a result of that, his entire life fell apart, because suddenly everything that he had been told by her was a lie. So everything that he had built his entire life on was a lie. And he couldn't deal with that, and as a result of that, started self-medicating with weed, and was smoking joints like they were cigarettes, and ended up having a psychotic episode as a result. And so that journey started, and the end result was his death, because he just didn't have the resilience, the strength, the I don't know what it was, but to face it all and to deal with it. And one of the overriding themes of the last 4 years with him has been, I can do this on my own. I don't need help.
True. That's very guyish.
Yeah, I can do this on my own. I don't need help. And he desperately needed help and he couldn't see it. And it was because there's this idea that men need to be strong. They need to be the providers. They need to have their shit together. And he couldn't do it. And, you know, he is one of so many men that I have met who struggle in that idea that they need to be strong, they need to be the providers, you know, this whole hunter-gatherer thing that goes on. When in fact, you know, we live in a society and in a culture that is filled with unresolved pain, and yet there's no place for that pain to be expressed. And so the pain is expressed through drug abuse, alcohol, physical abuse. You know, men that abuse their partners and their kids. I mean, they're in pain and they don't know what to do with this pain. They don't know how to express it. They don't know how to get it out. And unfortunately, it becomes abuse. And you know, instead of us as a society or as a culture stepping forward and offering a space for someone to express their pain, to feel their pain without feeling judged, criticized, um, without feeling judged and criticized, there's no space. So it's all internalized. It's just swallowed and suppressed and swallowed until it can't be. Um, and I think we're in this time where the pain that humanity carries is surfacing, and we have to deal with it now. It's become too obvious. It's become too normal.
Yeah, I mean, I watched. So, firstly, Kate, thanks for sharing that. I know it's vulnerable and heart. Yeah, thank you. I watched. I think it's called An American Dream, and it's the story of Trump, how he got to where he is. And I watched it out of curiosity, and there's such a similar storyline to what you've said. Because we're speaking about like toxic masculinity, around how he was looking for his approval of his father the whole time, and to be accepted and to be to have that love. And you can see in the pictures and the commentary and everything in the build of that, how he's developed this narcissistic or psychopathic tendency of control and domination and ego, and how this has been fostered. And we're literally at the moment living in a time right now, as we're recording this, is like we have probably the most toxic masculine example that I know of, or read of, or have witnessed, leading the free world as the president of the US. And when I look at that as in my life, the cowboys don't cry. It's such a thing that gets drilled into us when we're young. And I've seen mothers do it, like now, just going like, no crying, you're in the supermarket, we'll know this, and everything like it. And there's this controlling of our emotions. And then the story for us men is that we're not allowed to cry. Like we can't cry. Crying is weakness, and the world doesn't respond to that. Look at Trump, look at anybody who's been in the power. Now, when have you seen a president cry? Ever? I don't think I've ever seen footage of a president crying. And so we don't have any examples around that being okay, which translates to me, and at least the work that I've done, is that we're not allowed to feel those feelings. So we're not allowed to feel like a failure. We're not allowed to feel inconsequential. We're not allowed to feel pain of what I see as, I suppose, the inner child of what you're speaking about. That what your brother went through, and just being able to mourn and feel the shit that that was. And what I used to do was use alcohol, and then I used running and using all of these masks on top of it that are, in my opinion, foster more toxic behavior. Um, so I think as a guy, it's just looking at your brother and just like, yo, this next generation needs to really be able to have a space and permission to be able to speak and process feeling as opposed to just thinking. And I mean, I think you know this. Like, I've got a guys group that I've been involved with for the past couple of years now, and we get together every Tuesday, and we orientate it around meditation, because rugby and whatever other kind of cultural narrative that is okay for guys didn't resonate with the eight of us. And now we had one evening where we spoke about the thing that we're most scared of. I cannot even tell you how painful and fearful it was to be able to speak my truth around what I was most scared of in life, around other guys, and how I was triggered by sitting there going like, I'm about to tell men something that my judgment was pathetic and vulnerable and soft, and they're going to laugh at me. What happened after that, when we all shared, the biggest relief I think I've ever had in my entire life, knowing that other men have feelings and other men need to be able to speak about what they feel and their insecurities, because we do. And even all of us now are we're still showing up, we're still trying to show up strong, but try bring vulnerability into that. And the deprogramming that's happening as we're going on this journey, as these men committed to one another, is like, the transformation in me has been massive. And it just, I look at Trump, I look at your example of your brother, and, this denial of what we're able to feel and the stuff that concerns us and the feelings that we deny, and where that takes us is, to my mind, where toxic masculinity is birthed and grown and fed and nurtured. And then what do we end up with? We end up with a Trump. We end up with a planet that feels like it's trying to kill us because we've been trying to kill it. We feel like every single woman has been abused. And the more you speak to every single woman that I've got a network of of lesbians, and listening to each one of them and the experiences that they've had, not that it's the reasoning for, but like the lack of respect and trust and everything that they have for men. It's mind-boggling when you start to unravel all of what this man pain has done to the planet, and has done to our society, and has done to our families, and has done to the environment, and the list goes on, and done to racism, and done, and like, it's yeah, I mean, thank you for putting that into context, because it's like, I think when you know a truth, but when somebody else reflects it, and what you've just, like, around what the example, I don't mean to minimize, but what your brother went through to end up taking his life is, I think, there's the deepest need for us to be able to kind of support men to show up in a different way. I'm certainly feeling it, and I'm certainly like, how do we how do we begin to heal all of this? And I think it's like you're saying, it's what I'm doing with my men's group. It's being able to have these conversations and speak about it. Speak about what we feel. Speak about what we're scared of. Speak about what we aim, what we want. Speak about also our relationships with our mother and our father. And I've had deep clarity around the last years, also around how they've influenced how I see the world, show up in the world, present myself, think, believe. Yeah, so thanks for sharing that, Kate.
I also, I mean, I think, Brent, what's so important as well is you mentioned the next generation, and I've got two adult children now who are that next generation, and what I'm incredibly impressed about with them, and their friends, both men and women, is how they are calling each other out when the toxicity rises. And it's not a calling out to shame them. It's a calling out to show them and explain to them that what they've just done or what they have just said is not actually okay. So there's this incredible, they're teaching each other because my kids look at my generation and they just go, we do not want to be like you. They
Thank
do
God.
not want to be like. Yeah, and I mean, I'm incredibly grateful for that, and have done everything I could possibly do to encourage my children to be themselves. And that I think is another thing that is so important is that we need to be able to get to a point where men and women, but we're focusing on the men right now, where men are allowed to be themselves, because I don't think that they have been. And they've had to suppress their individuality. They've had to express their uniqueness, despite over and above the fact that they've also had to suppress all their pain. And a lot of the things that we go through that cause us pain, that cause us suffering, are life defining or life defining moments, and actually moments that define who we become. And if in that moment of pain or suffering, we are not allowed the space to feel that, to go through it, to process it, it becomes something that gets stuck in the dark, that gets stuck in the shadow, and it will emerge at some point in our lives. And that point when it does emerge can be incredibly liberating or incredibly destructive. And we see the destruction in what happened to my brother, and we see the destruction in a lot of the leaders of the world as it stands currently. But if we can help men to find themselves, their individual self, their unique self, uncover that and release the pain that sits around that, then we are going to have a generation of men who can support their children to become who they are, instead of determining from day one, this is who you will be. Because that's what's happened to us. We were born into a world that told us, this is who you will be, this is how you must be, this is how you must behave, this is the path that you must follow, because this is how things are done. And some of us have broken free of that and carved our own journeys and our own paths despite all of that pressure. But a lot of people haven't. The majority of people haven't. And we're getting to a point now where there's nothing stable about the world right now. There's so much uncertainty around where we are going, what we are doing, what are we stepping into every day, because there's something new. And we've got to learn how to adapt to that. But we don't know how to adapt to that if we have been conditioned to follow a particular path and to be a particular way. So we really are in a crucial turning point, for everyone in the world, but particularly for men, because men carry the energy needed to recreate the structures that we need in our world.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, something's just kind of come up for me now, because I mean, part of the specialization work that I do is obviously with cancer, with people who've been diagnosed, and there's this mentality that I've constantly got to fight up against, which is a derivative of exactly what you're speaking about. It's this: I have to be strong, and I have to like I can't like, I've got to be positive and this and that and the next thing, and carry on with work, and no matter a loved one is falling, is passing, and you can't do anything, but there's this sense of being strong. And what I've come to witness, and it's a belief that is growing in me, And I've seen evidence of it, and I've worked with a lot of people and just seen it again and again and again around. The more you suppress, the more disease comes. So the more, like, even within a person. So and the people I have supported going through cancer, going through the hardest cancers with the worst scenarios, with the people who pass, the people who are like have the sense of obligation that they have to do this thing. And I know it's a masculine energy. I've seen it in women and in men, but it's this like I can't feel. I have to, like, this drilling into, like, you have to like be this masculine
Warrior.
strength, and it's just, it causes fucking disease, and it causes all the shit. But anyway, I suppose I was just reflecting in what came up for me now around what you were saying. Kate, is there anything, what would you advise, or what, and I mean, you've been a healer for a long time, what would you advise a man to do, and what would you advise a woman to do based on this? Because I think what you said right up front, which is important to me, is that we both have the masculine and the feminine elements to us. I can understand when I'm coming from different sides of that kind of equation, or that pendulum. So we each have masculine, we each have feminine. But what would you advise a man around this? What would you advise, or wisdom, or an insight, a woman as well?
Well, I think that the first thing that we need to do is acknowledge that we're in pain. You know, every the world is reflecting it.
Mm.
The pain is there. It's out there. It's now being seen. And I think that we first have to acknowledge that it's not out there. It's inside of each one of us.
Mm.
So for me, that is the first step, and then it is discovering what that pain is. Because for some of us, we've suppressed it so deeply that we don't actually even know what it is. I mean, I can reflect on my brother's life and look at everything that he endured and went through from birth, and get an understanding of why he was the way that he was, why he behaved the way that he behaved. I can look at it compassionately, and I did. I did my very best to affirm what he was feeling, and affirm that his life had been pretty tragic. But he couldn't do that. And I think that that's where we start, men and women. We've got to go back to the source of that pain and dig into the roots of it and find healing with that. And in that healing process, find compassion for ourselves. One of the things that I always think of when I listen to the news, and I hear, living in, and this Brett, living in South Africa, I mean, there are incredibly well, I couldn't find the words, horrendous acts that happen. There are horrendous murders of women and children. There are the rape of babies. I mean, for goodness sake, that, how does that even happen? And I always think, when I hear those stories, I always think, if I move beyond the horror of it, and I move into that space of compassion, what is it that has driven that man to do that? Sometimes it's drugs, but invariably it's pain. And what is going to happen to him when he realizes what he has done? How can your mind accept that? How can you actually process what you have done? And it's something that I always think about when I hear these terrible stories, and I just think that person at some point is going to realize, and might only be on his deathbed, realize what he's done, and how does he actually live with himself or live with that or accept it. And I mean, you can't. No wonder people become drug addicts and alcoholics. There are things that we have endured that you just think, how do you cope with it? Especially in a world where that person that has done that thing, that awful thing, is judged, criticized, blamed, imprisoned. There's no support. There's just an attack on that person instead of saying this person is in incredible pain. And if we look back to indigenous cultures and hundreds, if not thousands of years ago, on how indigenous cultures dealt with the person that had done something wrong, they would call the tribes together, the community together, and they would sit and hold a space so that they could try and understand why or what had driven this person to do what they had done, and show compassion, not punishment.
Yeah.
And that's where we need to start with each other and with ourselves. We need to be able to look at ourselves with compassion. We need, people talk about, there's this whole movement around, you need to learn to love yourself. How do you do that? I'm still trying to figure that one out. I've been doing work on myself since I was in my early 20s, and I still don't understand that whole self-love fun. But what I came to realize, 10, 12 years ago, and it's still something that I have to work on, is the need, before we can have self-love for ourselves, we actually need to have empathy and compassion. We need to be able to look at our lives and the things that we've done and the choices that we've made, the bad ones, and to be able to say, well, at that time, that's all I knew how to do. At that time, that is the only reaction I had, because I didn't know how to deal with all of this pain. Did not know what to do with it, because there was no space for me to be able to bring it up and look at it. There was no one around me who could hold that space, and enable that process to happen. And that's, the other thing is that, sure, we need to look at our stuff, we need to look at our pain, we need to go to the root, but we need to be able to do it in a space where we are held by others. We cannot do it on our own. It is just not possible. Because if we try and do it on our own, we end up in the space that my brother was in. And the only way out is death.
Sure. Thanks, Ben.
And I mean, I must say, I've known you a long time. I think I met you when you were about 27 or 28.
My mother Googled you as a spiritual healer, and I've been with you for 17 years, and you're one of my closest friends now. So what were you going to say about me?
It's been quite a 17-year journey, and I often reflect, after we've chatted or I've seen you. I often reflect on who you were when I first met you.
Yeah.
And the man that you are today. The potential was definitely there when you were 27. But what is incredible is that you've grown into that potential. And that has been through a journey that has taken you into all of your stuff and all of your pain. And it's, I know that it's something that you continue to reflect on and continue to work on. And if I can just say to anyone who's listening to this, it is a journey. There is no magic wand and there is no quick fix. For you, it's taken you 17 years to get to this point where you can stand as a man, being vulnerable and open and sharing. But it's not something that we can do in 5 minutes.
Yeah, and I've got a huge amount of empathy for people, and especially men who are starting this journey, because what is being asked of them is, I had 17 years to digest a lot of this, make changes, look at things differently, research, be vulnerable. Like I had 17 years, and what's being asked of men now is they don't have that amount of time. Like we have to change now if the world's going to shift. I mean, I think this was, if I remember, the dream that you had that you shared on the last podcast that we actually did was, you've got this Armageddon or you've got this heavenly space. And I think that it's a choice now, and it's a choice that we can choose to go what you've said, compassion. And I mean, this is what this podcast is about. It's fierce compassion for a reason. It's the only thing that I've ever been able to change is with compassion for myself first, and then everything else happens from there. But it's a choice that, are we going to go on that path and open ourselves to who we truly are, or are we going to live more unconsciously and reactive? And that's where Trump, what's ahead of Trump if we carry on in that? Like who's the next leader that we're going to manifest as a global community if we choose this? But this is hard. This is not an easy thing, and thanks to you, I'm eternally grateful for you being patient with me and all of that time. Patient, supportive, kind, giving me a kick up the arse when I needed one as well. And John Freeth, I mean, he's the help that you and I both have as our kind of primary support. And so John is a psychotherapist. He's essentially a support. And I had an interesting realization with him the other day. I said, it's he creates a space that allows me to feel safe enough to look at the things that I need to look at, that are difficult to look at, and the things that are difficult to feel, and the things that are difficult to witness within myself, that that I'm not comfortable with. And it's just having that safe space that somebody will accept and love and give you and reflect self-compassion again and again and again, no matter what comes out of my mouth or what I've done, or and because I've got up to shit in my life, stuff that I've got a lot of shame around still. But it's that exactly what you're speaking about. It's that safe space that I've got with you, that I've got with John, that I've got with some special people in my life that allow me to look at myself without tinted rose-colored glasses and go, this is who you are.
And all without the judgment.
And that's the key. That's, if there's any, I'm not one to believe in religion or sin, but if there's any sin that we have on this planet right now, it's judgment, in my opinion, because that is the only thing that makes us feel less than. And in everything that we've discussed today, I feel masculine toxicity originates from like that viewpoint that we are not enough, that we have to do something or succeed at something in order to become, and that's the belief of the truth that needs to be dislodged with sharing and community and connection and being vulnerable, and that's where the healing starts. So anyway, I'm getting on a tangent again, but thank you, Kate. Like this is this has got a very nice energy to it, this podcast, and I really appreciate, as always, your vulnerability and your honesty. And this is going to be a plug, because this is the reason why we're doing this podcast, is the reason why we're here, is to be able to support men in being able to communicate, being able to witness themselves, being able to support one another with men. And I couldn't be more honored to be actually going on this journey with you, because we're developing a program to help men, guide them into a space where they can start building these communities for themselves. But you and I nurturing that conversation to be able to have us guys just crack open a bit and just go like, okay, what am I if I'm not controlling, success, responsible, what am I if I'm not that? And to answer that question, or explore that question, not answer that question, explore it. Yeah. And that's coming soon. And
Yeah, I mean, I think, no, well, I was just going to add to that, and I just think it's an opportunity. You know, we're working towards creating an opportunity and a space for men to go into those uncomfortable places without that judgment, without feeling like they need to be anything other than themselves.
mm,
And being themselves means being able to face the shame, face the regret, face the sense of failure without needing to change it,
phew,
because we can't change the past.
yeah,
We can only deal with what we have in front of us today. But we can let go of the judgment and the shame and the criticism around what we've been and who we've been, what we've done that has resulted in who we've become, and choose a different way forward
mm,
rather than just repeating the pain of the past.
thanks.